Alexa, the resident emo girl, and you know what? It's always lovely to pop my head over here to say hi. Sadly, the topic of today's discussion is a little less nice, since as a woman, life can be pretty weird and scary sometimes, and that's with living in this modern era. I hope you're ready, and welcome to the top 10 disturbing things women went through in the Dark Ages. Number 10. Satan's ladies. Back in the Dark Ages, women were very much oppressed and incredibly misunderstood. Honestly, if one is to look at the percentage of women who were and weren't accused of witchcraft, and just how easy it was to, quote unquote, prove a woman was a witch, the data is very much skewed. Granted, I'm not about to jump into generalized witch hunt torment right this moment, so bear with me. So back in the Dark Ages, some folks thought that women were Satan's incarnate and ergo were predisposed to sin, and therefore, by that logic, they had to be witches. Trust me, I know the common sense was missing from that statement. There were 4 reasons why women were considered to be part of the devil's posse, if you will. For starters, it was believed that women were foolish and gullible, which is why they turned to magic. Yeah, that hurt my brain to say. Number 2, because women are insatiable when it comes to carnal pleasures, they seek out help from the devil to satiate their needs. I can think of better ways, but alright. Number 3, women talk a lot and allegedly speak lies because we talk too much. Great, I'm already classifying myself as a witch. Finally, women are weak, and the only way we can seek revenge is by using magic powers and spells. Pardon me, I can feel my brain leaking out of my ears. Sadly, that was the reality back then, because having a personality and independence meant, game over. Number 9. Interrogation tactics. So what happens if you do get accused of being a witch, or Satan's wifey? Time to go through the witch trials, which is a polite way of saying sentenced to torment until you either confessed or someone found proof by ways of a certain marking on your body. Let's talk about one of the most agonizing methods of torment, shall we? If you're, femme presenting and get arrested for something serious and the townspeople want information out of you, they drag you into a dungeon, strip you until you're in the nude, tie a rope around each one of your ankles and hoist you up so that you're upside down with your legs spread apart, and once again in your birthday suit, so probably shivering in the cold. Now here comes the most horrifying part of the whole thing. You know those saws that folks use to cut down trees? Specifically the really big ones that tend to take 2 folks to use? So one of those would be used to slice you in half from the rear to the head. Easily one of the most painful ways that you could go in my opinion. The wild thing about the saw is that it wasn't originally made for trees and then used on people. It's actually the other way around. Pardon me, I'll be shuddering for the rest of today. Number 8, that time of the month. Ant Flow, the Red Sea, Shark Week. Heck, the event has so many monikers, but those who experience it can agree that it's a pretty miserable period of time. Back in the day, folks didn't have the same kinds of resources that we have in today's age, so a lot of people really had to get creative. They would use rags or other linens to fashion, a pad, but underwear wasn't all that popular yet, so they had to find a way to keep things in, place. Some folks would fashion a makeshift medieval tampon of sorts where they would wrap cotton fabric around a twig, which sounds super uncomfortable if you ask me. Other folks would seek out bog moss because it was remarkably absorbent, and funny enough the name BLOOD moss became synonymous with it because of its use of treating wounds and in period products. If you didn't have access to those things, some folks would simply resort to wearing red the whole time so everything just sort of blended in. I love the lazy approach. Makes sense to me. Number 7. A ban on stripes. Might as well touch a little more on some Dark Age fashion rules. We've all met somebody in our lives who's way too concerned with what other people are wearing, but back in the Dark Ages, you actually risk the possibility of coming across some very real fashion police who are actually able to issue a fine should your fashion choices not be of the local dress code. I'm in trouble. Sometimes it wasn't even just a fine. Some serious fashion faux pas could actually lead to your imprisonment or even your death. Stripes were definitely a main culprit in these times, since striped clothing was seen as a garment of the devil. Okay, I'm good. If you need evidence, because I know that sounds wild. Specifically in 1310 in a French town, there was a local cobbler who was put to death because he'd been caught in striped clothing. Not only were members of the clergy not exempt from this rule, since they were pretty highly ranked at the time, but neither were animals. Poor zebras. They were referred to as the beasts of the devil. I'm so glad that's something that's faded with time. Number 6. Quickie Wedding. I'm sure we all know at least one couple that got married way too quickly in our opinion, but thankfully in today's modern age, it's relatively painless to end that, if things go bad. Heck, drive-through wedding chapels are a thing nowadays and have been for quite some time. Well, so marriage in the Dark Ages was quick and easy, but also kind of difficult to prove. If you and your loved one really wanted to get married, all you had to do was say, "We're married," and then, it's legal. Of course, this led to a whole pile of spur-of-the-moment type marriages, especially considering how schmex before marriage was widely condemned at the time. While I'm sure many people who are divorced would have preferred if their marriages were this easy, this led to people, of course, taking advantage of this difficult-to-prove thing. Women in particular were at risk of getting hitched to a man who might want to take you as his wife for the night, but then the following day after getting what he wants, he'd deny ever agreeing to the union y'all had. This is why many women tried to get at least one witness to the union, just in case. Nowadays I believe at least 2 witnesses are needed for the marriage certificate, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Number 5, an uncommon plague. I know, no one wants to hear about a plague ever again after recent history, but I promise, this one isn't your typical version. The dancing plague of 1518, or dance epidemic of 1518, was a case of dancing mania that occurred in what is now known as France, from July of 1518 to September. The outbreak began when a woman by the name of Fro Trofea began to dance fervently in the street for a week straight. Oh, my poor ankles. Soon, 3 dozen others joined in on the dancing chaos, with the plague claiming 400 victims by August. By early September, the outbreak began to subside as the dancers were sent to a mountain shrine to pray for absolution. Guess we found our footloose inspiration. It's unsure just how many, but a small number of victims actually did pass from this epidemic, which is wild. Historical documents, including physician notes, cathedral sermons, local and regional chronicles, and even notes issued by the city council are clear that the victims danced, but nobody knows why. There are many theories behind the phenomenon, the most popular being stress-induced mass hysteria. Other theories include ergot and religious explanations. It'd be interesting to see if this ever pops up again in modern times with how stress levels are these days. Hey look, sometimes a girl just wants a flash dance moment without judgment, okay? Number 4, divorce by combat. Yeah, so people could get divorced, but it was a heck of a process. Divorce by combat appears to have been a form of trial by combat, which was when accusations were dealt with between 2 parties where there were no witnesses or a confession, and whoever won the duel was deemed to be right. The rules for a divorce by combat as we know it come from Hans Stauffer's Fruchtbuch. I apologize if I got that wrong, which was written in 1467 and are as follows. The man would be placed in a waist-height 1 meter deep hole with one hand tied behind his back, while the woman was allowed to move freely. Both parties wore practical clothes, which is described as a one-piece bodysuit with stirrup legs. The woman was armed with 3 rocks, each wrapped in a length of cloth to form a kind of swinging club. The man was given 3 normal clubs that matched the length of the woman's cloth to ensure that, their ranges were equal. The man was not allowed to leave his hole though. To further limit him, if he touched the edge of his hole with either his hand or arm, he had to surrender one of his clubs. If the woman attacked him while he was surrendering his club, she in turn forfeited one of her rocks. Yes, the rules place the man at a clear disadvantage, but it's important to remember that it's unlikely that the woman had any kind of combat training. Furthermore, in any kind of physical contest, it is likely the male would have had an advantage in size and strength at the time. So the handicaps placed on the man were to try and make the fight as fair as possible. Which, it's pretty impressive for the time period. The conditions for victory, though, are unclear. Some historians believe that it was unlikely that the fights were to the death. Instead, it was probably down to whoever was judging this thing to decide when one of the fighters had been incapacitated. Since both parties were hitting each other with big blunt objects, it seems likely that many trials ended with one party being knocked unconscious. Thankfully, divorces are a lot less lethal today. Mostly. Number 3, toothworms. So dentists weren't common in the Dark Ages, but barbers were, and wound up being a one-stop shop for quite a few different services. This guy did it all. Cavity, toothaches, teeth worms, you name it, or in a lot of cases, pull it. Barbers were responsible for cutting hair, pulling teeth, red fluid letting, your classic 3-in-1 appointment. So much more efficient than the silly 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner combos we have today. This was like the peak of efficiency. Instead of brushing your teeth with tooth tunes, back then you'd rub your teeth and gums with a rough linen. A few recipes have been discovered for pastes and powders to freshen breath, otherwise you were looking at less and less teeth as time went on. As a society, we've gone from powdered charcoal to charcoal toothpaste, which is kinda neat. As time went on, mouthwashes were made from herbs and spices steeped in wine or vinegar and guaranteed fresh breath, but I'll stick with my crust and mouthwash. Thanks! Number 2, no pleasure during procreation. Now, some of you watching might know all about the hanky-panky, and some of you might not. But regardless, you probably know that people do it for fun more than they tend to do it to create a descendant. That's why we as a society have invented things like condoms. Because trying for a spawn is only fun when you really want to. And you shouldn't have to worry about, knocking boots and accidentally creating life. But back in the Dark Ages, there was a law that you were not allowed to get down and dirty unless it was for the purpose of, have an offspring. And you weren't allowed to experience any kind of pleasure when you were doing it, even if it was for the purpose of creating new life. It's like telling somebody to eat food, but you're not allowed to taste anything or enjoy your food. I believe it was one of those rules that people claimed came from God and used for their own uppity bias. There's plenty of those still in place today that I'm constantly rolling my eyes at, but this isn't the time or place for my venting. Thankfully nowadays, most folks understand that coitus can be for pleasure and fun, and not just spawning new lives. Have fun safely, folks. Number 1, no cheating. So if you were a man back in the Dark Ages and you got caught having an affair, you'd have to pay a fine, so big whoop. But if you were a woman, like everything else on our list, it was so much worse. Back in the Dark Ages, women were punished with a situation worse than death in, well, my opinion. Frederick II used to punish adulterers by using rhinotomy, which is the removal of one's, nose. The whole point of this was to make the victim unattractive, but from a needing to breathe point, it would also shorten one's already short lifespan. Another fun body part removal option was losing an ear, and honestly I can't figure out which would be worse, so let me know what you think in the comments. That brings us to the end of our time, and I'm once again so glad I live in today's world and not the past. Between my sense in fashion, my ADHD, and my need to perform, I'd be euchred. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more fantastic content, and I'll see y'all next time I buzz in over here at Bumblebee.